No one at Fairmont Crest truly believes that a divorce ever ends in the way it is supposed to. People only believe that it changes shape. There are separations that feel like a door closing, and there are separations that feel like a dark room where everyone is still standing inside, merely turning their backs on one another and pretending they no longer breathe the same air. Lately, though, in the polished corridors of the elite club, at parties where laughter is refined like jewelry, a strange sensation has been creeping in, as if someone has stretched a thin wire beneath everyone's feet and is waiting for the exact moment to pull it tight. Whispers appear before events themselves, like signs that something is being carefully hidden. A photograph vanishing from someone's phone at the precise moment it is needed. An appointment record erased from the system before it can be printed. A bouquet delivered to the wrong address, yet bearing the correct name of its recipient. And in all these small irregular details, the name Ted keeps surfacing, indelible ink stain. People say he has chosen to live again not after death, but after his own marriage. And if that is true, then someone will not allow him to be reborn in peace. Nicole has tried to convince herself that her calm is real, that she has passed the stage of scrambling, of fearing, of looking back at what was lost with a heart-bleeding, unhealed wound. But Nicole's composure is nothing more than a thin coat of paint over a decaying house. She knows this better than anyone, because she's the one who has lived in that house long enough to recognize the creaking of breaking beams, to know that cracks in the walls do not appear without cause. Nicole once took pride in her ability to maintain control, in how she could command the atmosphere of a room with nothing more than a look and the precise second she chose to stop speaking. But when Shanice appeared beside Ted, all those skills suddenly became useless, as if someone had stripped away everything Nicole had ever used to protect herself, exposing a very primal fear, the fear of being replaced. Shanice was unlike the women Nicole had once dismissed with effortless contempt. Shanice was younger, but not naive, gentle, but not weak. And most dangerously of all, Shanice entered this story without the goal of pleasing anyone. She stepped in as if she knew she deserved to be there, as if she believed Ted was choosing her not out of revenge against Nicole or a moment of impulsiveness, but because he genuinely wanted a different life that drove Nicole mad in a way she did not want to admit. Nicole began to track every smallest sign. She did not call it jealousy. She called it vigilance. She did not call it clinging. She called it protecting her dignity. But deep down, Nicole knew the truth was far worse. She was obsessed with the thought that Ted had stopped loving her long ago, and that she either had not noticed or had noticed and chosen to deny it. Every time she saw Ted appear with a new, effortless calm, Nicole felt as if she were being slapped. A man who had once orbited her like a loyal satellite could now stand upright in his own world, and that made Nicole feel diminished, lost, as if everything she had relied on to define her own worth was collapsing. She could not bear that feeling, and she could bear even less the idea that Shanice might be the cause or worse, the proof. Shanice, for her part, was not blind to the change in the way Nicole looked at her. At first, Shanice thought it was merely the natural discomfort of a woman who had once been a wife, who had shared a long history with the man Shanice was drawing closer to. But Nicole did not stop at discomfort. She began building an invisible wall around Ted, through chance encounters that were far too perfect, through messages passed indirectly, through the constant invocation of old memories, as if they were private property no one else was allowed to touch. Shanice had once believed she would withdraw if she felt herself being pulled into a dirty war. She had thought her career, her reputation, and even her own peace of mind mattered more than a relationship that risked becoming a scandal. But as time went on, Shanice realized something else. If she stepped back simply because Nicole wanted her to, she would spend the rest of her life in quiet humiliation, like someone who had conceded defeat before the fight even began. And Shanice hated being treated as someone who could be frightened into retreat by power. Everything ignited on an evening when Fairmont Crest still appeared elegant and harmless. A charity event, golden light poured down like honey, wine glasses reflecting faces skilled at concealment. Nicole arrived looking immaculate, but inside her was a storm. She saw Shanice smiling at Ted, not a broad smile, just one sufficient to signal that they shared something private. Nicole felt as if someone were stealing what had once belonged to her, right in front of her, in a room full of people where she could not allow herself to lose control. Nicole chose to attack in the way Nicole always did, cold, precise, and more threatening than crude words. She did not need to shout. She only needed Shanice to understand that Nicole could ruin her life with things Shanice would have no time to defend against: professional, reputation, working relationships, doors that had only just begun to open. What Nicole did not anticipate was that Shanice had lived long enough in this world to know who was threatening whom. Shanice did not collapse. She did not apologize. She did not retreat. Instead, she let the hurt harden into something solid in her chest, like a heated stone. She thought of all the times women were forced to disappear, as that others could feel safe. She thought of Nicole using the past like a knife to slash at someone else's present, and Shanice felt disgust. Her anger did not explode into noise. It flowed into resolve. She stopped seeing Nicole merely as Ted's ex-wife and began to see her as someone trying to crush her with power. From that moment on, Shanice understood that she was not only in love with Ted, she was fighting not to be destroyed. Ted did not immediately know what had happened, but he felt the atmosphere shift the way one senses a drop in temperature before a storm. He had once believed he could keep everything civilized, that Nicole would know where to stop, at the boundary of self-respect. He had believed that Nicole, though hurt, would understand that separation meant letting go. But Ted misjudged the depth of Nicole's desperation, and he also misjudged the sharpness Shanice could display when cornered. He began to notice glances that lingered too long, silences between the two women stretched taut like wires, and the way Shanice suddenly avoided places where Nicole appeared, as if shielding herself from an invisible blade. Ted grew uncomfortable, then worried, and then something more frightening emerged: guilt. He wondered whether he had pulled Shanice into a war she did not deserve to fight. At the same time, a deeper part of him flared with anger toward Nicole, because he understood very clearly. Nicole was not threatening Shanice out of love for him. She was threatening her because she could not bear losing control of a story in which she had once been the center. The truth surfaced in a way no one had time to prepare for, not through a blunt confession, but through a chain of events that converged into a shock. A professional opportunity for Shanice was suddenly withdrawn without explanation. A rumor began circulating about Shanice's climbing ambition, and then an acquaintance casually revealed that Nicole had been looking into Shanice rather thoroughly in recent days. Shanice immediately knew this was no coincidence. She stood in her apartment, looking at the life she had built with sweat and patience, and felt someone else's hands reaching toward it with the intent to destroy. Shanice wanted to run, to save herself from a vortex of power. But then she thought of Ted. She thought that if she retreated, Nicole would learn a cruel lesson, that threats alone were enough to win. And in her anger, Shanice began doing the one thing Nicole hated most: she stopped being silent. She began holding tightly to Ted as a statement, not through display, but by appearing at the right moments, standing beside him in the right places, letting people see and understand. Shanice did not need to humiliate Nicole with words. She only needed to make Nicole see that Shanice could not be erased from the picture. When Ted finally learned that Nicole had threatened Shanice, he did not react the way Nicole expected. He did not soften because of the past. He did not step back to keep the peace. What erupted in Ted was long-suppressed fury, like a man finally realizing he had lived too long in fear of other people's anger. He thought of all the times Nicole had forced him to choose the right way, to behave according to the right image, to do everything so that Nicole would not lose face. And now Nicole was doing the same thing to Shanice, as if she believed Ted would automatically side with her simply because she had once been his wife. Ted hated being manipulated, hated feeling like he was being turned into an asset Nicole needed to protect. Yet he also felt pain, because he did not want to see Nicole become the very woman she once despised. someone who used power to destroy others simply because she had been left behind. Ted realized this was the moment he had to decide not just between two women, but between two versions of himself. A Ted who continued to live in emotional debt to Nicole, or a Ted who dared to cut ties in order to be free. Nicole could not bear the change in Ted's eyes when he looked at her. They were no longer the eyes of a man who had once loved her, respected her, feared hurting her. They were the eyes of a man who had reached the limit of endurance. Nicole felt betrayed in the most bitter way, not because Ted had someone new, but because Ted dared to stand with that new person in front of her. She began justifying herself internally, telling herself she was only protecting what was hers. But the more she thought, the more an unbearable truth surfaced. Ted no longer belonged to her, and perhaps never had in the way she believed. That loss sent Nicole into panic, and in panic, she lost control over her cruelty. She began thinking of stronger blows, of things that would not merely frighten Shanice, but break her. She thought of twisting the truth, creating a narrative that would paint Shanice as a homewrecker, force Ted into a position of accountability before the community, the family, the invisible rules of Fairmont Crest. Nicole believed that if the pressure on Ted became great enough, he would return not out of love, but out of fear of losing everything. But Shanice was no longer a woman who could be forced back by darkness. She began paying a different price, the loss of her own inner peace, sleepless nights, moments of disorientation when she stared into the mirror and wondered whether she was becoming someone aggressive, whether she was losing herself just to win. Shanice was angry at Nicole and angry at herself for letting love turn into war. Yet the more she suffered, the more she grasped a cold truth. At Fairmont Crest, anyone who does not know how to react when cornered will be devoured. And Shanice did not want to be devoured. She began gathering evidence of the invisible attacks on her career, linking the traces together, transforming fear into strategy. That frightened Ted as well. He loved Shanice for her vitality, but he began to see her changing, becoming colder, more guarded, and he wondered whether this love was pulling Shanice toward a ruthless version of herself she might one day regret. The climax did not come from a public confrontation, but from an event that caused all three to lose something. Someone close to Shanice was involved in a small but strange accident, sending Shanice into panic with the sense that things had crossed from social threats into truly dangerous territory. At the same time, private information about Ted was leaked at precisely the wrong moment, as if someone were trying to drag him down and force him back into an old circle of control. Ted understood immediately that this was no longer ordinary jealousy. It was a power struggle disguised as emotion, and in that moment, he had to face the cost of his choice. If he protected Shanice, he would confront Nicole by cutting her off completely, accepting the hatred of the woman who had once been his family. If he softened toward Nicole, he would betray Shanice and the future he was trying to build. Ted felt as if he was standing on a collapsing bridge, behind him a past heavy with obligation and guilt, ahead of him a love fraught with risk. Nicole, driven by the sensation of losing everything, began reacting more and more extremely, and in doing so, she lost even more. She lost the respect of those who had once sided with her, lost the image of the elegant woman she had worked so hard to construct, and worst of all, lost the belief that she deserved to be loved without controlling others. But Nicole did not admit defeat. She only felt herself pushed to the point where she had to fight with whatever remained. Shanice, too, was cornered, and the fury inside her became a dangerous source of strength. It kept her standing, but it could also push her too far, turn her into the villain in someone else's story. Ted stood between two storms, and his greatest pain was not having to choose, but realizing that any choice would result in an irreparable loss. And within that loss, the most frightening question was no longer whether Shanice would retreat in fear of Nicole's threats, or whom Ted would protect. The question became, after all these shocks, could love still be love, or had it become merely a battlefield where emotions were used as weapons, the past as a blade, honor as a hostage? At Fairmont Crest, no one ever truly retreats. They only step back to gather momentum, and just when everything seems to have reached its limit, a small detail emerges, like a rusted key, falling from someone's pocket enough to suggest that Nicole may have known a secret about Ted for a very long time, a secret that, if exposed, would not only destroy Shanice, but also destroy Ted himself in ways none of them could yet imagine, turning this war into something no longer about an ex-wife and a lover, but about who will survive when the truth finally turns on the light.